Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you today.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
Doing well.
Good.
With a little bit of good news and a little bit of caution and a little bit of bad news.
Yeah, well, got to mix it all together.
Yeah, that's it. But the main thing is I hope there will always be a little bit of revelation of truth. And that is what we seek. The truth will make us free if we ever get that out. But there are some things I sort of describe that the truth is leaking out. Here now and then we read the articles and we get sort of excited with somebody saying, you know what, da-da-da. And it was things we've been saying from the very beginning, as others have. We didn't have a monopoly on warning people. But, early on when this thing broke, we were pretty much up front on what we thought was happening. Of course, it probably got a little bit worse. I never believed there would be this much control and this much rolling over of the people and not objecting. But now we're getting it, and I think this is important, more serious writing done to challenge some of these misunderstandings. And this to me, I think, is good. One side effect from this, I hope is true, is, there's a lot, and we'll talk about, T cells and immunizations and all. Maybe this will stir up in the midst of all the fake news and the politicians being involved in practicing medicine. Hopefully there'll be some scientists out there and the physicians who are on the right track. Maybe there'll be some good discoveries in spite of it all, rather than all the distortion. And that's what's really been going on. But there have been a little bit better understanding about T cells and immunizations and when this can occur. That to me is very positive, because even the average physician, including myself, we're not naturally experts, on this. I don't think I ever heard the word T cell when I was in medical school, And so there's some serious thinking going on here, and finding out that just maybe with the new knowledge, you'll say, why in the world did we ever do this? And then we'll have an example of where some of this stuff started. What they're doing now in China will reveal about their shenanigans.
Yeah, well, you remember when that first came out, when they tried to justify locking us down, actually, ironically mirroring the approach of the communist Chinese, who were terrible, horrible people. They're so totalitarian. We did the same thing they did. But remember, they said, this is a new virus. We have to do something different. We have to lock everyone down. We've never seen anything like this before. Run for the hills. That was the attitude, rather than, careful, scientific. Well, thankfully, science is catching up to the hysteria. And one of our good news stories really is another news study that was just published last week. And it focused not necessarily on antibodies, but it focused on these memory T cells. And the T cells, as you know, Dr. Paul, better than me, they identify and destroy infected cells. And then they tell the B cells how to make antibodies. So it's just a kind of little military inside your body, right?
Yeah.
So the new study was published in the journal Cell, and what it discovered is that T cells offer long-term immunity. Here's what the study says. Memory T cells will likely prove critical for long-term protection against COVID-19. The study looked at 206 people who were exposed to it in Sweden with varying degrees of severity. And they determined, regardless of exposure, they all developed robust T cell response, even those who tested negative for antibodies.
Yeah, and the challenge that we all have had is, and what the people are hearing, is the reporting of the data, which is so distorted. And it's always describing things are the end of the world is going to be there. And now we're starting to get some of these reports. Here's one, the number of U.S. hospitals. Maybe some of this immunity is developing. Maybe it was even better than we ever dreamed. But the hospitalizations, way down. One group said it's about where it had been real bad. It little 1% per day. But and you've shown the chart so many times where especially the deaths are the zero, and especially that they're fudging even the deaths they have. It's not a clean report, and also the reporting of the cases, pretending the cases are equivalent to deaths.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of falsehoods there. And yet now we're starting to find out that natural immunity is maybe, even in my own mind, I keep thinking, it's a wonderful thing, and immunity is great, and nature is a pretty good ally for us to keep our health. But here I think there's some really encouraging thing, mainly because this scenario of the horrendous problem that we had, it was so bad. So when you get to reality of what really was happening, plus the fact that nature has been more helpful than anybody dreamed, all of a sudden, it's looking better. But unfortunately, our kids still aren't in school.
Yeah.
They haven't wised up. It seems like the politicians have grabbed hold of power and they don't want to relinquish it. And certain groups do, like parents right now would like to get back to a little bit of normalcy and knowing what to do with their kids and all this thing. So, but hopefully these stats now coming out will be more realistic, and then some reassurance that there's more tests than just a nose swab, and then all of a sudden,
you're positive.
And then all of a sudden you're quarantined forever. So I see some positive things happening here.
Well, there are a lot of good teachers out there, and there are a few of them in the Paul family, definitely good. But there are also a lot of teachers who love getting their full paycheck, sitting at home with their slippers on, whining about how scared they are to go back to work. And meanwhile, the people at your grocery store that are working every day have to deal with it. And guess what? If there was a massacre among grocery store workers, we would definitely hear about it, and there isn't. But who's really crying about this T-cell study? Is Fauci and is Gates. Their tears are flowing. But in fact, they're not really crying because we've already been forced to pay for these vaccines, even though ultimately they may not be successful because the disease, as with SARS, will just die out. But they've already gotten hundreds of billions of dollars to develop. They've already gone to the bank and sucked out all of our money. So they'll be crying, but they'll be crying crocodile tears.
All this correction for something that disappeared.
Disappeared.
They're still looking for the disease.
But there are a couple of other studies too on the same line about the T cells, and it's really interesting. It's not just one study here that came through. There are a couple of other studies too that came out about it, and there are two more recent ones. In the first one, everyone produced T cells. The second, 80% produced T cells. And the other said that many who have never had COVID-19 still have the T cells. So they're immune to it, essentially, about 50% even, as high as 50% of the population. Even Fauci said this is good news. The other thing that's important is that these are long-lasting. They looked at some people that had T cells developed from SARS 17 years ago. They're still present, they're still on the job, doing their business, but they also are recognizing the new COVID virus as well. And they're suiting up, they're arming their bazookas, and they're shooting at these new cells as well. So the whole thing that this points out is that it's counterproductive to keep healthy people from getting this virus, because you get it, you develop your T cells, your immunities, your antibodies, and not only are you going to be safe in the future, but you're a line of defense against older people that are more vulnerable and sicker people, because the virus can't pass through you, it can't move on. So everything they've done in this country is counterproductive.
Well, here's a headline that sort of describes what is occurring, very encouraging. The case for masks, school closing, and social isolation just collapsed.
Yeah.
So that is good. Now that's the message that more people need to hear, because there's still so many challenges. And where was it the other day that, well, this isn't hard to find these examples, but somebody got into a fist fight over it because he thought somebody else should have had a mask on and wouldn't do it. So the violence continues, but that is important, and everybody can see it when they get into a fight, and that's violence. But the violence that I look at, which is the big violence, is the violence of government. it's the lockdown. That's violent because, oh no, they didn't do it. There was never a law passed. You didn't have to do this if you didn't want to, but we know how that works. And so it's the guns that government used to intimidate and terrorize and scare people, and at the same time, it does lead to real violence too. So just like there's a lot of authoritarianism and guns used to promote interventionist or a socialist economy, which is violence. But then, so often, those types of economies lead to real war. And I think this is in a way similar. The people are being told what they had to do. You can't do this and stay in your house or you'll be in big trouble. At the same time, it's a tremendous stress level. And we've mentioned so many times how many young people are suffering. The people who are perfectly safe, absolutely safe, and they practically can't even find a case. And yet they're the ones who are suffering because they're getting locked up. And they probably have a sense of imprisonment, being in a house and can't get out and can't go to school. So they call it here in this article social isolation. Maybe there'll be some members, but that's not what they've been used to. And the stress level is way too high. Kids can get stress levels even without this, but with what's going on now is continuing. So that's that really is so misleading when they talk about, people get sick and people do die, which is serious. But if you're not using the right treatment and the treatment's killing more of them, how can you justify it? And that's the way I look at it. That the treatment was overkill. In a sense, they did too much and harmed a lot of innocent people and took people who were sick. Even though there is no denying that this is a serious problem, but there's a lot of ignorance that occurred. The way this was handled, when you come to the politicians, we complain of politicians like Fauci doing all the medical treatment, but what about governors of states directing patients to nursing homes and elsewhere? That's violent, and it contributed to the deaths that happened. But no, right now, most people still, unfortunately, in spite of our efforts, most people, are annoyed and sometimes very angered by people who won't obey and follow. Don't you know you're making it unsafe for me and my kids, which is just not true.
Yeah, people don't think when they're afraid. That's what the beauty of fear. After 9/11, look what they did. Everyone was afraid. Keep us safe. Do whatever you want, please. But the collapse in the article that you're talking about, and we put up a graphic on yesterday's show about it, but it was a big study in China that they did, very big study in China that they did, and it found that asymptomatic people essentially don't pass on this virus to others. It doesn't happen, and that the vast majority of infecting others takes place within a household, so not on surfaces and all these things, which is kind of irritating because I wanted to go back to the gym yesterday and I gave them a phone call and they said, well, if you want to come in, you got to have a mask on to go from the front door to the weight room, but then you can take it off, as if somehow the virus gets confused and doesn't know what to do.
That'll really help.
But this is it's an important study. And I mean, people should understand that we're citing studies in medical journals that you won't see on TV because the TV doesn't want you to see these things, but they're out there and they're developing knowledge about this. And it is good news in a way, but it's frustrating news because no one else seems to be listening. Let's look at this one thing. We talk about this a lot, Dr. Paul, but before we move on to the next topic, just this next graphic, because it's just so dramatic. Let's look at New York and Sweden. New York wears masks. They closed business. They closed schools. They mandated social distancing. Sweden did not, but both reached near zero deaths at the same time. I mean, that is incredible. At the same time, the only thing in common is similar antibody levels. So when they reached a certain percentage, veering toward 15% antibody positive in the tests, that's when the deaths declined to zero. So none of it was necessary. And I think you have something about the Chinese are learning.
Well,
something.
the Chinese, and how about New York?
Oh, New York,
New
York,
too,
yeah.
Half the people are leaving.
Are leaving.
And that means the tax base is gone.
Yeah.
Taxes were too high anyway. And matter of fact, somebody made the point they were leaving even before coronavirus.
Yeah.
They had had enough of it. But this was the climax of it, and people were leaving in droves. But no, I found that the article on Wuhan very interesting. I hope we have a little picture of this.
We do, actually.
Because all of a sudden, they're telling us that things are taken care of in Wuhan, and they're having fun. What's the government think about this? I thought they were the ones that locked them down.
Wear their masks.
But isn't that fantastic?
Where are the
no
Karens?
mask, and nobody worried. Yes, imperfectly. I like Sweden's approach and South Dakota's approach, and there's other ways of doing it. But the principle is I doubt if medicine helped them get to this position.
Yeah.
And I think they ran out of steam trying just using authoritarianism. But a lot of people, there's people obviously aren't living in fear that if I go to the park and get exposed to all this, I'm going to have a coronavirus and I'm going to die next year. But there are people in this country that feel that way, and it'd be nice if we could reassure them, because it's really, in many ways, not their fault that they're feared. I mean, especially young people can, when adults and people in authority start, telling people how serious this is, people can get fearful. And I've seen and known some teenagers that are very upset about it all.
Sure, you probably should be. But, the irony is that for all the criticism of China here in the U.S., and some of it is so over the top, our government exactly mirrored the tyrannical, the so-called tyrannical authoritarian government of China. We had the exact same approach to this virus. Shut it all down. No, you can't do anything. And they finally had to let go, and I think they probably reached herd immunity there. We also talked about the slums in India, remember, where they just didn't have the resources. You can't social distance when you're packed in like that. There's no mask. Nobody has any money. They can't even eat. And now they don't have any deaths. So this is just a natural occurrence that happens.
You talk about the over exertion on dealing with this. So how about in Melbourne? They have drones. They have drones flying all over the place just to catch somebody without a mask.
Yeah.
Can you believe that? Especially since we, at least I do, and you share this belief that they're not doing any good anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, if they were doing some good, it's still wild that they're going to. It just is part of this. It's probably just testing things. When it really becomes necessary, we'll find out if the drones are any good at tracing people and following people around. But fortunately, it's breaking through. If they can have a good time in Wuhan, I think we deserve to have a good time too. We need to get back to the beaches, and we need to get to people in school. More people are saying this now. Well, at least on the Republican side they are. But it's a political stunt. How can we do that if we won't have anything to blame Trump for? And Trump, if anything, probably leaned in the other direction. Until the pressure got too great.
Well, a lot. We get some criticism for always being negative and not offering some positive solutions. Well, this next thing I think we should categorize. Here's one possible way out, and let's look at this next clip, Dr. Paul, because in Utah there are some slight reasons for optimism. Lawmakers see no reason to extend Utah governor's emergency orders dealing with COVID-19. Now, unfortunately, they don't have the supermajority they need to veto if the governor just declares he has the power to continue these emergency orders. But there aren't the votes to support him in this. So at the very least, the legislature is waking up in places like Utah. They're saying this is out of bounds. This is way too far. Unfortunately, we can't say the same for our own governor, who's still in la la land. He's still listening to that one doctor in Baylor who makes Fauci look like Atlas. But let's look at, unfortunately, contrast it with what's happening in Texas. Here's the next one. But this is also encouraging. Texas GOP and doctors tell Abbott the data and the science doesn't warrant 5 months of shutdown. So he's getting some pushback. And listen to this, Dr. Paul. When I see these young kids at HEB and working in these jobs, and they're so uncomfortable masked up, I really feel sorry for them. I genuinely do. And several of them have told me in private, this is a nightmare, this is a horror. Listen to this. This is from this article that we're showing here. The Texas Department of Health Services reports that deaths among Texans under age 19 represent 0% of the state's population. The majority of deaths are over 65 and among people with pre-existing conditions. So there are a few people that are running and a few people that are in the state legislature who are getting very active in demanding an end to his emergency powers. And in fact, they're looking to overturn the 1975 Emergency Powers Act, which they should do because that is the key to this tyranny. Unfortunately, they don't have enough gumption to come back in session, which is what they need to do, and overturn this. But maybe they'll look to Utah and other states and start realizing their power, and they are going to be popular. These representatives in our state government are going to be very popular if they stand up for the people.
You know, we've shown frequently, you know, the age groups who are vulnerable. And the young people aren't vulnerable. You know, even under 50, you're pretty safe. But the young age, just they don't get the disease and they don't have the problem. But what you just said, you showed this zero danger of all the young people. But what if you took the chart of those who suffer from anxiety and have problems, and maybe the young people don't have the highest rate, but anything is too high because it's, you know, as a result. So it's a contrast. Here they overtreated to the group that didn't need any treatment, and because, especially today with this report, that even if they've had it and they're immune, they're not going to pass it on to anybody, you know, and they're going to have their protection in a natural way. But if you look at the anxiety, you know, the statistics are coming out now. The suicide rate has gone up with young people, but that doesn't mean that older people can't get anxious either because of all the propaganda. You know, you can't. I don't think anybody's immune from the thought, even though we have a clear understanding that it wouldn't be inconceivable. People who would agree with us, you know, if they have a sneeze and a cough and a cold, you know, the first thing, oh, I wonder if I could get it, you know. It's possible they could, but the anxiety is there for everybody. But maybe somebody will do a study of that and compare the deaths to the excesses, anxieties that didn't exist before the lockdown.
Yeah, I'm sure you'd like to take Mrs. Paul out for dinner sometime. You can't go because you got to put this on. You got to act like a fool.
When you talk about dinner, you know, I'm one that really enjoy being at home and having my dinner. And I was less anxious to go out. But lately, I told my wife Carol, I said, you know, things will be a little slow, and we don't have anybody in our swimming pool. And I said, you know, maybe tonight is the night we can go out to dinner. And then she says, yeah, I don't know if you can get in there without a mask on you. Well, I'll help you make dinner. So I just can't do it. So no, you give that up, and it makes no sense.
It doesn't. I'm going to go through a couple of quick graphs just because I keep pounding away on this, and this is the cooking the books thing. First of all, is something that's very interesting, and this is a really, really good Twitter account. If I could put this first one up. This is fascinating, Dr. Paul, because on the bottom is a graph of SARS in 2003 and how the virus behaved in terms of daily case arrivals. And then above it is our current situation. You have the northern latitude state peak on 412 to the left, and the border state peak, which is us, on 715. The exact same curves that you had in SARS in 2003. So despite everything that they did, the virus behaved just like the previous virus. So let's move on really quickly. And here's Arizona. They're virtually down to baseline when it comes to inpatient COVID-19, inpatient ICU census. It's all down to baseline, yet they still reported 105 deaths. Let's go to the next one. And look at this, Dr. Paul. Fatalities rising, but the census in the ICU is dramatically falling. Something is not adding up. Do one more. The next one, please. It's still not adding up. And what you're having is what I've been talking about quite a bit, is that they are pulling deaths from the past and recategorizing them COVID deaths. And Ethical Skeptic is a great Twitter site to follow, Twitter page to follow. But he talks about there are enough CDC excess deaths that can be recategorized to keep the daily posting at about 1,200 per day. So even though the hospitals are almost virtually empty, there are these massive numbers of deaths that make it look like there's still a lot of deaths going on. But you drill down a little bit, and they're from March and April and May. So this is how they're really cooking the books.
They ought to be charged with fraud.
Yeah.
Because it could be bureaucratic nonsense and mistakes and that sort of thing. But to me, I smell a rat.
Yeah.
Somebody's orchestrating this, and it's just working out too neat how this all comes together. I mentioned the fact that half the people are talking about leaving New York City, and they're leaving, and of course that includes the policemen too. They're sick and tired of it too, and we've been probably independent-minded in looking at the police, and we were critical of police over exuberance, in the drug war and all. But right now, we're looking at the more decent police who do their job seriously are just about had it. When they try to, arrest some murderer and somebody building or tearing down a building and burning up establishments, that they all of a sudden, their bosses. That means the mayor and the city councils. They say, "Oh, well, this is they're just having a little fun," that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So no wonder they're leaving. But there's also the people leaving New York City. But here's one: San Francisco cops aren't waiting to be defunded. Their attitude, they know what's coming. And San Francisco is a mess because they've been putting up with the street problems for a long time. But that street problem is a violation of property rights. And if you're the owner of a shop and you try to, clear the sidewalk in front of your shop, you get arrested. You're expected to pay to clean it up. That's the whole thing. But that it goes on. But here's another clip that I think fits into it along economics. World trade plunged to the lowest levels on record in June. And we hear positive statements, and they can find them because once an economy crashes, there'll be upticks, and percentage-wise, they look pretty decent. But this world trade, of course, this bothers me because I think world trade is what you need. You need more of it. And we shouldn't be trying to cut off and threaten, intimidate people. And I think that leads to more problems. But this has not helped. So the coronavirus lockdown has done this, but it's also the people that when economies get weak due to bad monetary policy, it ends up with distortions in trade, so they resort to protectionism. So it's a real mixed things on economic. But one thing for sure, everybody agrees that the lockdown has not been beneficial to the economies. And if they come around to even getting a little bit closer to us, they say, maybe it wasn't all that necessary. It wasn't necessary at all. So, but there's a lot of suffering that's a consequence of this.
No kidding. Well, I'm going to do my closing, which is the villain of the week. This is Thursday. But I first just want to remind our viewers again about RonPaulHomeschool.com. Tom Woods has got a great portal into the Ron Paul homeschooling curriculum. You can save a bunch of money going through Tom's site. It's a self-taught curriculum. We'll have a link in the description of today's show, so you can click on it and see if it works for you. Why send your kids back to school when you can give them a better education anyway? But let's look at the villain of the week. For the first time, Dr. Paul, it's not, I could find plenty here, but I decided to go overseas a little bit and find, this is astonishing. You brought it up earlier. Let's bring up this first clip. And this is the danger of the universal basic income that they want to give us, right? If we have that first clip up here. No jab, no pay. This is from our friends at 21st Century Wire. No jab, no pay. Australia to use universal basic income benefit payments to enforce vaccine compliance. If you want to work, if you want to get your money, if you want to do anything in Australia, you've got to get that jab. Forget it. You got to get shot. Let's look at the next one. So it must be bad in Australia. Well, this is something that Lou had up on his site, LouRockwell.com today. The Prime Minister of Australia yesterday, Scott Morrison, said, quote, Australia should make any coronavirus vaccine compulsory for its 25 million citizens, bar medical exemptions, end quote. But listen to this, Dr. Paul. This comes with the knowledge that the overstated total deaths in Australia have reached only 400 deaths out of 25 million citizens. That is a death rate of 0.000016. And for that, he's shutting the country down, telling people you got to get shots. So, therefore, let's look at the next picture. Memorize this face. This monster is a villain of the week. Prime Minister Morrison of Australia. Go to the gulag.
He doesn't look very friendly.
No, there were some friendly ones, but I picked a nasty one because I don't like
Well,
him.
that's good. You know, this issue of basic income, I want to talk a little bit about that because it's so tempting. You know, you should have a basic income, and they always say, but it's based on two assumptions made by interventionists. They don't look at which society produces the best income for the middle class and the poor. And of course, we know that's a free market. But no, they want equality. Yeah, well, we want equality under justice of the law, you know, but this idea that there's going to be economic and equality for all of us, we know that we don't have equality when it comes to athletics,
yeah.
you know, this sort of thing. They always talk about, when they start talking about equality and fairness, you can be assured that there's something shady going on. But the basic income, if they want to have equality, you know what? I think they can get it. But it's equality that is down here. And that's what happens. If that becomes the theme, which is becoming more so every single day, that's the whole theme of what the Marxists that are in Congress and running for Congress, that's all about. We're for equality and fairness, but they never mention the fact, what does history show? Yes, you can get a lot of equality. Everybody's going to be poor and sick and destitute, and then the governments will come along and say, well, we got to occupy them with an activity, so we'll start a war. And this is the kind of thought that there's nothing wrong with having an inequitable economy, because matter of fact, that's what it's supposed to be. You know, if that's how people get ahead. That's why the minimum wage is so wrong, because you want people to get in and they get paid while they're learning and they're getting training. So you don't want this absolute equality dished out as fairness, and that is the way they sell it, and they seduce people into believing in it, and they do not know how liberty works. They do not know and understand how liberty can provide the highest standard of living for everybody, especially the middle class. And it's the way you can attack corporatism without attacking free markets, and that's what we have now. We have a lot of this going on already because we have corporatism, crony corporatism. We don't have free markets, and guess what? The rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, the middle class is getting wiped out, and we still have the Federal Reserve doing exactly what caused the problem, and that is Congress prints a little bit. I mean a lot. And then the Federal Reserve comes in and they print a little, no, a lot. And it just gets totally out of control. All the effort, and even our system is designed for developing an equitable society, one that is fair, and they're doing everything conceivable to make it turn out in the opposite fashion, just the way it is on managing the coronavirus. Everything that we have done is we've made things worse because we haven't accepted, you know, sound medical thinking. We've turned power over to the politicians, and we've allowed the politicians at any level of government to write their own laws. They're really not laws. They're just, oh, well, no, this is a suggestion by the governor, but if you don't do it, you'll never get a job again. They have all kinds of threats. So it is very seductive to come up with these fancy answers where government's going to solve our problem. But people have to realize that the government is the greatest creator of our financial and our problems, and the distraction and the destruction of our freedoms and our civil liberties. But no, we have a Constitution to protect that. No, we have a Constitution that's written, but quite frankly, there's not very many in Washington, from my experience, that even understand it, let alone defend it. And that's why we need to emphasize this, and this is why we invite you, our viewers and our supporters, to look at this seriously, because everybody has a responsibility. Once you discover this out of your own self-interest, you have to participate in this, because it's for our benefit, our kids' benefit. And yet, right now, everything is dependent. You know, we have the crisis, the government created the crisis. So what is the government going to do? They caused it, so they have to bail us out. And, you know, it's a powerful argument. These people I just described, they're very poor because of government action. And it's because they accepted it, because it was taught to them that we're supposed to accept all this nonsense and deficits and printed money. And so what happens? they keep doing it. That is why we're inevitably going to go to a major, major economic crisis where the dollar is going to be challenged, and the only thing that will be able to rescue us from that is a lot less government and understanding and promoting the cause of liberty. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. Please come back soon.